Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. I am Dr. Mudassir Associate Professor, Sahara Medical College, Narowal. And in the previous lectures, we have discussed about the ribs, about the types of ribs, about the characteristic features of the typical ribs and atypical ribs, along with the articulations of the rib. And during that, we have seen that the articulation of the rib is posteriorly is to the vertebra, which are named as thoracic vertebra. So today we are going to discuss about the thoracic vertebra, features of the thoracic vertebra, and how the ribs they articulate with it. So thoracic vertebrae are from T1 to T12. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae. A typical thoracic vertebra is a fairly large size and have a large body and a large spinous process with spinal foramina for the spinal cord, and vertebral foramina is generally circular, but somewhere it is also triangular. The transverse processes, as we see, they are projecting. This is anterior and this is posterior side. They are projecting backward and laterally, posterolaterally. And there are facets for the ribs, articulation of the ribs, to one facet to two facets on the body for the rib head and one facet for the at the transverse process for the articulation with the tubercle. So 12 thoracic vertebra here, a little bit shown. So here we see body of the vertebra. Then there is pedicle, as in the other vertebrae. Then there is the superior articular facet for the vertebra that will be above it. Then there is this is the lamina of the this here is the lamina, and then is the transverse process, which is projecting posterolaterally. Then there is lamina of the vertebra, and then there is the spinous process of the vertebra. A typical thoracic vertebra. In this lateral view, it has been shown that here is a facet for the articulation of the head of rib, another facet on the lower side of the body, on the posterolateral part of the body. There is the inferior facet for the also for the rib articulation. We will see how they articulate with it. And here is a notch which is for the passage of spinal nerve between the two vertebrae. The transfer process also shows a facet, and this is for the articulation of the tubercle with the tubercle of the rib. And here is the superior and inferior articular processes for the vertebra with each other. Also, the body will articulate with each other in the vertebra. So, we see that the body of the vertebra, thoracic vertebra, gradually increasing in size. So T12 vertebra is fairly large, large size as compared to the T1 vertebra. Pedicle that is smaller diameter, and the lamina vertical with the roof tiles arrangement. So pedicles, they are roof tile arrangements. And spinous process is long, projecting and becoming long also and the is projecting downward, but lower one they are more straighter than the upper one. So as the lumbar vertebra are going to start after that. So now here we see that here the vertebral foramina is shown through which the nerve will pass. Here the facets of the articular processes and different parts of the vertebra are shown. Transverse process, body, and rotatory axis has been shown. In this diagram, it is shown that the vertebra can rotate on each other, and this is the axis of rotation. And the body rotated axis is in the center of the body for the rotation of the vertebra. As during the exercise, we move mediolaterally and spins our body during exercise. Our trunk moves, rotates outward towards the right and towards the left side. This rotatory axis passes through the center of the body of the vertebra, and here is the movement shown which occurs at these joints. The articular facet for the vertebra with each other. And in this slide has been shown, this is T6 vertebra, T7 vertebra. Here are shown basically in this slide, in this diagram, they want to show articular facet, superior articular facet, inferior articular facet. And is a demifacet for the head of seventh rib with its own vertebra, and superior one also smaller than the lower one. The rib, same rib, articulates also with the T6 vertebra, seventh rib, and but the lower one, which is larger one, is for its own vertebra, T7. And here are the shown facet for the articulation of the tubercle. And with the same vertebra, it will be tubercle for the seventh rib. So it's from this diagram it becomes clear that the superior facet is for its own rib. Inferior facet is for the rib below it. And if we say that it is a T7 vertebra, so the head of the seventh rib, the lower facet, articulates with its body of its own vertebra, but the superior facet that articulates with the rib above. So it's very important point to note, because when we articulate a rib with a vertebra, we have to keep it in mind that if someone says, the examiner gives you a vertebra and says that this is seventh thoracic vertebra, articulate the seventh rib with it. So then you have to place the lower facet on the head of the rib with the body of the superior facet on the body of the T7 vertebra. Okay, so that will be proper articulation. Here is shown articulation of the rib. So this is the seventh rib, and if she is articulating with the both T6 vertebra also and seventh vertebra also, and the lower facet is for its own vertebra. The seventh rib articulates with the seventh with the superior facet. With the superior facet on the body of thoracic T7 vertebra, but the facet over the rib is the lower one. The upper facet on the rib head articulates with the inferior articular facet on the T6 vertebra. Here is shown the axis of movement of the rib during the pump handle or buckle handle movement. The axis passes crosses the joint, costovertebral joint, in this way. And here the movement of the ribs that occurs. The axis of movement for the joint, for the seventh rib, when it moves in the pump handle movement. So it's a costovertebral joint, and participants in the joints has been shown: body of the vertebra, intervertebral disc, head of the rib, body of the vertebra of the same number as the rib, and also the other joint, that is transverse joint, transfer process of the vertebra of the same number of rib, 7, tubercle of the rib. So we can understand it. And here are the other faces for the articulation, the superior articular face for the vertebra. Here the vertebra, they are articulating with each other. Through this spinal foramina, the nerve comes out. This is the vertebral foramina. Now next is so we have understood about the vertebra and the joints made by the vertebra. Number of joints are, if in this diagram we calculate the number of joints made by the one vertebra, say T7 vertebra, one is with the rib above, other is with the rib below. So two joints here, superior joints of the same vertebra, the superior facet on the T7 and inferior facet on the T6, two joints on both sides, two joints below with the 8th thoracic vertebra, 4 joints, one with body each other, that is five joints, one joint of the T7 vertebra with the lower facet of the inferior facet on the rib, head of the rib, and other joint is with the transverse process of the tubercle of the rib. So 5, 6, 7 joints are present here of one vertebra. The ribs, they make the 3 joints. One is the inferior joint with its own vertebra, one is the superior joint with the body of vertebra above, and here is with the intervertebral disc. And if we say there is a crest and there is a ligament attached with the intervertebral disc, but here so it's not actually is the joint, but it's articulates the intervertebral disc, and the third joint is with the transfer process of the vertebra. So next we come with the sternum. Here is the sternum. We can feel the sternum on our own body anteriorly, and we can feel the jugular notch on our own body. If we move laterally from if we see, it's a flat bone having an broader upper part, manubrium, then is the body, then is the xiphoid process. And here is the level of the sternum with the vertebral level of the sternum has been shown. So if we see the jugular notch, it is on the T3 vertebra, level of T3 vertebra. And if we see the joint between the body ends of sternum and the manubrium sterni, the manubrio-sternal joint, it is located at the level of T4 vertebra. And the xiphoid process makes joint with the body, and it is at the level of T9 vertebra. The disc between T and T9, or body of the T9 vertebra. So different levels of has been shown in this diagram. Here in this diagram has shown the articulation of the on the lateral. This is a lateral view articulation. Here is the articulation of the clavicle with the clavicle notch. Clavicle has been removed. Then is the first rib. Articulation with the cartilage of the first rib. Here is the articulation with the cartilage of the first rib. Here also articulation of the first rib. Then at the junction of the body and manubrium, that is the level of manubriosternal joint, or also called as the sternal angle, the joint is for the second rib. So we can see here that it's not a single one, it seems to be two cavities. Then for the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and then the seventh one. And below seventh, there is no articulation with the rib, with the sternum of the rib. Eighth, ninth, 10th, they are not attached to the sternum, but they are attached to each other, as we have seen in the previous lecture, that they are attached with the costal cartilage of each other, forming the sternal angle. They are not directly attached to the sternum. So, as if you recall that there are ribs which are named as true ribs, which are vertebrosternal ribs. So it means that if first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, they are attached with the sternum, so they will be vertebrosternal ribs. But below this, the 8th, 9th, 10th ribs, they are not attached with the sternum, but they are attached with the cartilages of each other, costal cartilages, so that they will be vertebrocontral ribs. And the lower two ribs, they are floating ribs. So sternum lies in the midline, in the tree chest wall. It's a flat bone, and three parts: manubrium sterni, then the body, and then the xiphoid process. And the body articulates with the manubrium, forming the manubriosternal joint, and below with the xiphoid, forming the xiphisternal joint. And on each side they articulate from the second to seventh costal cartilages. The first one also articulates with the manubrium, and no ribs or costal cartilage attached to it. Below this, with the xiphoid process, no rib or articular cartilage. With the xiphoid process, no rib attached. Is for the in this diagram we see is for the origin of fibers of diaphragm. And here again the levels has been shown. So if 1, 2 and this 3, this is for the body between second and third, for the manubrium sterni or first costal, first joint. Then is the sternal angle, the manubriosternal joint. Its level is the disc between below the lower border of T4, or disc between T4 and T5. And if you see the level, this is at the level of body of T9 vertebra, the xiphisternal joint. So we have seen this. Now here are the different attachments of the sternum as been shown here. So suprasternal notch, that is at the level of T2 and between the T2 and T3. So we can feel it, that the jugular notch, because his anterior jugular vein that is present, and that's why it's named as jugular notch. Laterally, if we see from the suprasternal notch or jugular notch, there are faces for the articulation of the clavicle, sternoclavicular joint, atypical synovial joint. It's not typical one, atypical. There are certain other features they are present along with the features of the synovial joint, having a body within the body which divides the joint into two parts, sternoclavicular joint. Then is the first sternocostal joint. This joint is also typical. It is primary cartilaginous. If we say that this is primary cartilaginous, so it means that no movement will occur at this joint of the first rib, primary cartilaginous joint. Mind it, keep it in mind that the joint of the first rib with the vertebra, T1 vertebra, is not primary cartilaginous. That joint is synovial. The joint with the sternum is primary cartilaginous. Means that if the sternum moves a little bit, then the first rib will move with it, but the movement of the rib will occur at the costovertebral joint of the first rib, not anteriorly on the sternocostal joint, which is primary cartilaginous. Then you will understand that the anteroposterior diameter, when increases during the pump handle movement, the sternum as well as the first rib, they move above, and the movement of the first rib is occurring at the costovertebral joint posteriorly at the T1 vertebra. The other joint of the ribs, second sternum, atypical synovial because it is having two cavities, one above with the manubrium, other below with the body of the sternum. So that's why it's a synovial joint. It's not cartilaginous joint. A little bit movement can occur here also. But the third to seventh joints, they are atypical synovial with the single cavity. Atypical synovial because these joints are between the cartilages, costal cartilages, and the body of the sternum. That means that one part is cartilaginous, other is the bony part. So actually, it is not sternocostal joint. We can say sternochondral joints. These joints are sternochondral, but they are synovial. Again, repeating that the first joint of the first rib is primary cartilaginous with no movement. Second one is the atypical synovial with the double cavity. Third to seventh, they are atypical synovial joints with single cavity. Here is shown further attachments on the body. Here is the attachment of the pect major. Then is the attachment of the anterior intercostal membrane, which is part of external intercostal muscle that we will study later on. Internal intercostal muscle, transverse thoracic muscle. They are attached on the sides of the sternum. The manubriosternal junction, that is the manubriosternal joint, it is named as angle of Lewis. It's a secondary cartilaginous joint, not the primary one. Usually does not fuse. Does not fuse at any age. But below is a xiphisternal joint. It's also a secondary cartilaginous joint. It usually fuses by the age of 40 years. This joint, it fuses, but this joint does not fuse. Is that called angle of Lewis, and is a secondary cartilaginous joint. And here last one, here shown the insertion of sternocleidomastoid, or you can say origin or insertion of one of the attachment of the, and on the Z5 process below is the origin of or insertion of rectus abdominis muscle. Along with that is the 5th, 6th and 7th cartilages, also the rectus abdominis, that is attachment of the rectus abdominis muscle. So then we will say something about the sternal angle because it's very important. In this diagram we see that here is the manubriosternal joint, sternal angle or angle of Lewis. If you feel on your own body, you can feel. You go down from the jugular notch and keep on feeling the center of sternum. Then you will feel a projected part of the sternum, which shows that here is the sternal angle, which is projected. In some persons is more projected, in some it's not as much projected. So if you see the sternal notch body between the second and third vertebra and the sternal angle, it is between the fourth and fifth vertebra, or the on the intervertebral disc, at the level of intervertebral disc. So angle is formed by articulation of manubrium with the body of sternum, and it can be recognized by the presence of transverse ridge on the anterior aspect of sternum. The transverse ridge lies at the level of second costal ridge. Costal, costal cartilage, that is the rib, the point which all costal cartilage and ribs are counted. Yeah, from this, you can count the ribs. So if you feel, you feel the clavicle on your body, and if you come below, you will feel the transverse ridge, and on the side will be the rib. That will be the second rib. Above it will be the first intercostal space. So you start counting from here. First you feel the transverse ridge, the sternal angle, and then move laterally, you feel the second rib. Then you start from the second rib, counting downward the rib. Here is shown the sternal angle formed by articulation of manubrium body, a level of second cartilage, and behind it is the level of T4, body of opposite the intervertebral disc between the T4 and T5. In this has been shown here the very important structures, they are present at this level. So first is that we will see that how it separates the superior mediastinum from the inferior mediastinum, and by separating it, what structures are present in the superior mediastinum, that is the aortic arch, bifurcation of trachea, and the other features of here at this level. So we will study it later on. But the present, here is the shown structure significance. Landmark is a significant landmark as ribs are counted down from this level. Number 1, from the second rib. Makes plane of separation of the superior and inferior mediastinum. Number 2, ascending aorta ends, arch of aorta starts, ends, and descending aorta begins. So our whole of the arch of aorta is in the at this level is the start of arch of aorta, and also ends, arch of aorta ends at this level. Trachea divides into two bronchi at this level. Then the azygous vein arches over the roof of the right lung and empties into the superior vena cava at this level. Pulmonary trunk also divides into right and left branches at this level. Thoracic duct crosses from the right to the left at this level, and then empties on into the left brachiocephalic vein. Upper limit of the base of the heart, that we'll see later on. Cardiac plexus are situated at the same level. Here are situated the cardiac plexus, that is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve which supplies the heart. Is the cardiac plexus formed at this level. Superficial and deep cardiac plexus, they are formed, and then the nerve they are supplied to the, that are the sympathetic autonomic nerves. Otherwise there is no spinal nerve which is supplying the heart. It's only the autonomic supply to the heart. Heart beats by itself. Now in the next lecture, inshallah, we will discuss about the intercostal spaces and contents of intercostal spaces, then the muscles, and we will discuss in the next lecture. So we have learned about the vertebra and their features about the vertebra, the features which differentiate from other vertebrae, that are the demi-facets for the ribs, on the transfer process, and on the body for the articulation of the ribs, which differentiate. Also, the shape of the body and spinal process that differs from the other vertebrae. And then we have studied about the sternum, its parts and attachments, and knows the sternal angle and importance of the sternal angle. So inshallah, in the next lecture we will discuss the intercostal spaces. Allah Hafiz.